Good evening. I'm Joe Carbonetta, and from the Pasadena Media Center, this is Arroyo Live. Our program is produced by Pasadena Media to help enrich our community through informative and meaningful conversation. Remember, you can share your comments with us anytime at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org. Every year, the 22nd of April is recognized as Earth Day, a day celebrated by billions of people around the world promoting awareness about the health of our environment. This year, 2022, marked the 50th year for the celebration, and the anniversary comes at a time when the health of our environment is quickly moving to take center stage. Global warming, once dismissed as a concept of fringe or even pseudoscience, has, in recent years, become a widely recognized and accepted fact of growing concern. And when the effects of even slight increases in global temperatures are examined and considered, the cause for concern and even alarm become all too clear. Radical changes in weather patterns, bringing unprecedented flooding and drought, are only the beginning. Reducing the effects will require a global effort. Experts say reducing pollution is an excellent place to start. One of the methods for achieving such a goal is recycling. Tonight, a conversation about Earth Day and what is to come as the world tries to unite in an ongoing effort to save our environment. Please join me for tonight's edition of Arroyo Live. I'm joined by Ms. Cheryl Auger, president of Ban Sup. Good afternoon, and how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Um, well, I'm a local store owner of the Ban Sup Refill Store, and I'm also president of Ban Sup. And Sup stands for single-use plastic. The group Ban Sup focuses on bringing awareness to the plastic crisis as well, and also focuses on legislation. And the store focuses on trying to reduce people's plastic consumption.
Well, you anticipated my first question by explaining what the SUP stands for. So tell us a little bit more about this program to ban the supplemental use plastic.
Well, it seems like 93% or more of all plastic that's ever been made since 1907 has not been recycled. And furthermore, this plastic continues to exist in some form or another, and eventually turning into microplastics and finding its way into our bloodstream, our unborn fetuses, and of course, many different species as well. And so there's a huge plastic crisis that doesn't seem to have a lot of visibility or awareness to it. So by having both a store that focuses on that and a group that focuses on that, I feel like we're helping people to understand that, that your Windex bottle is not recyclable, or your plastic bag that you pick up your hamburger in or your Target purchase in is not recyclable. It's amazing. It actually seems like you could actually just dump everything into your garbage bin that's going to the landfill, and you'd probably be more accurate about what's not recyclable in that choice.
I wanted to make mention, you mentioned just a moment ago about the presence of plastic in the bloodstream. It was very recently announced that scientists had discovered for the first time traces of plastic in the human bloodstream. They've seen plastics in the intestines, in the gut region before, but they're recently beginning to find it in the bloodstream as well, which is very alarming. And they've traced some of that back to the plastic disposable water bottles, the single-use water bottles that you pick up at the grocery store. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So, yeah, there's been a lot more awareness and news features highlighting these problems. We actually have a couple of women doctors that are in our group that have developed a presentation that is just on the health impacts of the plastic in a person's body. And besides having it reduces the sperm count in men. It reduces the penis size. It changes a woman's menstrual cycle. It's really impacting our health significantly. But then when you think about, I just read an article last week about bees that are covered with microplastics, and therefore they're obviously pollinating our food less. But you have to also wonder, when such a small creature that's so vital to our existence is covered with microplastics and probably pollinating our food with microplastics, what is that doing for these other creatures that are just trying to exist in this world? That's, we really don't understand what are the impacts of plastic or microplastics. And so this impact could be felt for many centuries.
Well, and you mentioned, of course, how important the bees are to our food supplies in general. But a moment before that, you also touched on the potential for reduction in genitalia size, as well as reduced sperm counts and other reproductive issues. So it sounds like it suggests a larger issue of the ability of the species to procreate at some point, that we might see reductions in population numbers over the long term. It could actually threaten humanity on a much larger scale.
It certainly could. Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting because the plastic crisis certainly doesn't dwarf the climate crisis nor the water drought crisis. But the fact that plastic is expected to be more plastic in the ocean than fish by 2050. We're already seeing fish and plastic in fish stomach. We're already seeing such a significant impact of plastic on our planet that and its contribution to 1% of the greenhouse gas emissions, its consumption of 15 trillion gallons of water every year. It's definitely going to have a significant impact on our species survival even.
So how much of the plastics that we come in contact with on a day-to-day basis make up what's considered supplemental use plastic? Can you give us a broad example of what supplemental use plastics are?
Sure. So it's kind of interesting because that's all over the map, but I can tell you that the highest percentage of plastic that we're getting right now that's single use is actually from packaging. So everybody knows the Amazon shipments are certainly very popular since COVID started, probably even way more popular before that. But the fact that they rose significantly during COVID, all of that packaging is not recyclable and not compostable. So that is packaging that could be replaced with friendlier materials that could be recycled or compost. And I'm actually more of a fan of things that can be composted or even reused. So that's one great example. Then also other examples include things like sometimes you get something in a package, then you open it up and it's inside of a package, and then you open it up and it's inside of another package. Like this especially for shops that are trying to like reduce the amount of items that are stolen or keeping items together. All of these materials have excessive single-use plastic packaging that will only be used for a very short period of time by the consumer or the end user. And therefore, that's just a lot of excessive waste. Now, if a manufacturer could say, well, I understand that I'm going to be sending something that has 3 parts and I want to keep them together. So they put that into a box and maybe you only have the picture of the item on the outside. So you don't have the translucence of the ability to peer through a cardboard box, for instance, then that would be better. And it would be better for the planet. It would be better for certainly all species.
Well, it's interesting that you make mention of the idea of a plastic window in a cardboard box. uh, the plastic windows almost seem to come about as a result of a movement years ago to reduce the amount of paper and cardboard products that were being circulated on the market because that was resulting in the wide scale destruction of trees. So it almost seems as though the industry moved away from the use of paper and cardboard and into the use of plastics as a replacement. Also, years ago, there was a lot of styrofoam usage, and that all seemed to have been replaced with plastics as well. So, uh, did we solve one problem by creating another?
It seems so. It absolutely seems so. But I would wonder how much the lobbyists were actually behind the transition to plastic from paper, because I know that certainly when I was younger, there was a lot of conversations about the deforestation, the water consumption, higher than plastic, the weight, the shipping. Those arguments all still exist. But when you compare the overall carbon footprint of plastic to that of trees, then there's pretty much no denying what's the better option. It's not only the carbon footprint, but it's also, of course, the harmful side effects and the fact that we just don't know because it's going to be in our environments for so long, this synthetic material. And the other thing is that, well, I'm not confident that I'm an advocate of just saying, well, let's start using, trees. And although, I know bamboo forests grow really quickly, but I personally feel like we need every single lung on this planet right now. And I don't even advocate using, trees for toilet paper or any type of paper. I just think that this is the point where we really need to be serious about the materials that we're consuming. And you can see a lot of things that are now being sold unpackaged, and that's probably the best way to go. And for these things that can't be sold unpackaged, then we should sell them with minimal package that's compostable. So I think there are options, but and then the other thing is like shopping local so that you don't have to ship things and then you don't get that packaging. There's so much more we could be doing.
Well, what inspired you to become involved in the advocacy of recycling?
Um, well, shockingly, I've only known about this problem for maybe 3 or 4 years. I honestly thought that everything I threw in the blue recycling bin got recycled. And I just happened to be at a conference with somebody from another group member from LADWP. And I heard them, this discussion where they were laughing at people because they said that we were stupid, that we would throw things into the recycling bin and think that everything was going to get recycled. And of course, like stained like pizza boxes would not get recycled because it was contaminated and had food and oil and grease on it. And I was just kind of taken aback by that because I was listening and I'm like, but I thought everybody was telling us that everything's recyclable. And um, it, it, I mean, I look at the top of my cover, my garbage cover in Pasadena, it's blue. The recycling bin is blue. On top of the blue cover, it says, recycling plastics number 1 through 7. It says it in Spanish too, plasticos, 1 through 7. And it appeared from all information that I was receiving that they were wrong. I was right. But then I started reading more online and learned that they were right. I was being misinformed. We all were being misinformed. So I wrote Department of Public Works an email, just like, hey, I heard that only plastics made from 1 and 7, 1 and 2, sorry, resins number 1 and 2 are recyclable. Can you confirm this? And in my heart, I was just like, please let me be wrong. Even though I had read so much about it and knew I was so right, I was like, please, please, please let me be wrong this one time, and let the whole world be wrong, and let me know that they're actually taking care of our waste. And I got the email back, and he's like, sure enough, 1 and 2 you can throw in the recycling bin, but everything else needs to go in the garbage bin. And then they sent an email to, actually a formal letter to the council members saying the same thing going forward, that we should just put plastics made from 3 through 7 in the trash bin so it can be sent to the landfill. And then when you think about 50, well, I'm probably haven't been throwing plastics away for 50 years, but for however many years that I have been contributing to this waste stream, and that waste, now knowing that that waste stream will be here for hundreds of years and having unknown impacts, it's not a great feeling for sure.
Well, so what is the reason for the misinformation? Why indicate on the refuse collection can that you can basically put in all of these plastics and all of these paper goods, and in fact they're only dealing with a very, very small percentage of what you're putting in there?
Right. So my thought about why this is happening is because haulers are incentivized by the ton. They get paid by the ton, so they would like for you to throw anything that you possibly can in there. And then they also get compensated, if even if it has to all go to the landfill, they're still getting compensated, but it's just that, they're getting the haul. So I believe that's part of the problem. And then on the other side, you have like the American Chemistry Council and DART. It's actually a real dark story. Like that, we have so many lobbyists that are actually focused on making sure that legislation doesn't pass. There's and our politicians are getting thousands of dollars from the petroleum industry. And there was a really interesting bill a couple of years ago, AB 1080, well, two bills actually, AB 1080 and SB 54. And they were both focused on plastic recycling by 2032 at that time, 75% by 2032. Only focused on plastics because the bill had gotten so weeded out that by the end of the time it was watered down, but still, a noble goal. Let's get 75% recycling by 2032. The SB 54 bill passed the Senate the day before the hearings ended for that year. It was 2020, I believe. When the bill went over to the assembly to get voted on, it was short 4 votes, including my own assembly members. And then when we looked, there were about 16 assembly members that did not vote. It's taken down as an NVR, no vote recorded. And when we looked at their campaign contributions, we saw that all of them that had the NVR had several donations of $2,000 from DART, who's a polystyrene manufacturer. And then some of them even received $2,000 after that NVR vote. So our voting is very much tied to lobbyists' efforts, and contributions. And it's actually pretty bad. Like last week, there was a meeting for another bill, and one of the lobbyists went up to the podium and said, we don't support this bill because you want to ban polystyrene. And so it's like, it's not about, they don't care about people. They don't care about the planet. They don't care about the species. They don't care about our health impacts. They really just care about making money.
Well, a moment ago, you mentioned the plastic bags that we get from the grocery store. And I'd like to focus on that for a minute because, as I alluded to a little earlier, there was a time when you would go to the grocery store and make your purchases and everything would be bagged in paper bags. But then there was a push to reduce the amount of rainforest devastation, basically destruction of forests in general. And so there was a move away from using paper-based products for a lot of packaging, and including the grocery store bags. And those were replaced with plastic bags, single-use plastic bags. Certainly, there was also a convenience factor in that the single-use plastic bags had handles, whereas the vast majority of the paper bags did not. Then there was a push to get rid of those because they were basically polluting the environment. Now they've kind of come back again, only they're made of a more durable plastic. The idea being that you would then have to purchase and could supposedly reuse them. And so here in California, we're purchasing them at a rate of 10 cents a bag. How effective has that campaign been, both in deterring people from using it by charging them and in encouraging people to reuse the plastic bags after the fact?
Right. Okay. Well, certainly it's hard to measure like how many times people are reusing these bags, but you can certainly see from the time, like every time you go to a traditional grocery store or, any store, that 10 cents is not a deterrent. I've actually even commented, I think would because I see everybody just saying, oh yes, I'll pay for the bags, I'll pay for the bags, I'll pay for the bags. I think we should ratchet it up to $1 a bag, or just not even make that an option anymore. And in fact, if stores are getting their materials in boxes, then they should just give people boxes to carry their groceries out in. I don't think that life has to be all about convenience and simplicity.
You also indicated, at least I believe, if I understood you correctly, that those plastic bags are not recyclable. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, well, and I have to say, plastic is not recyclable at all with the true definition of recyclability. Like a glass jar is recyclable because a glass can be turned into a glass without, that's it. You don't need anything to add. A glass turns into a glass. A metal object turns into a metal object. Paper turns into paper. Like that is what the definition of recyclability is, or recycling. For plastics, you actually have to add virgin polymer. So it's actually, so it's actually it's downcycling. And sometimes you can make other products out of it. So in the case of plastic bags, plastic bags are definitely not recyclable. They are downcyclable into things like benches and stuff. And I think that some people are making them. Lots of companies, I think, are actually doing that, or a few. But you cannot put them in your blue bin and send them to a sorting facility, because it will get jammed in the machine.
If the vast majority of what we are placing in the blue can, under the misguided belief that it can all be recycled, is in fact not being recycled, what is happening to the vast majority of those plastics we're putting in the blue cans?
Well, I can say that we're in a better place today than we are tomorrow, or yesterday, because we just had a bill passed last year, AB 881, that states were no longer able to send mixed plastic waste offshore, which is awesome. It's not far enough. We need to actually now follow Basel Action Network's plan to actually not let us send any of our plastic waste abroad. That would be the best thing we could possibly do. So that would force us to manage our own waste. But so this is it. So some of it ends up in the landfill. Some of it ends up as a pollutant. Some of it, goes down the Arroyo and out to the ocean. A lot of it ends up hurting animals, whether they ingest it or, a lot of them actually, whether they're on land and sea, ingest it, and then they're not able to eat food anymore, and then they starve. A lot of it ends up in like Malaysia. Most of California's waste was actually going to Malaysia, the plastic waste. And there people would sort it looking for plastic made from resins 1, 2, and 5. And they're just these garbage heaps. And a lot of people would bring the plastic into their homes and cook with it, or they would use it in their walls for insulation, and the children will play in it. And it's just also starting, it's definitely a pollution in their areas, and also going into the rivers and hurting the food they're growing. They're burning it. It's just bad.
So, are there plans to mitigate the continual pollution with plastics? I mean, is there legislation pending? What's being done to stem the tide?
So, in a couple states like Maine and Colorado and Oregon. So those states have really focused on extended producer responsibility, where they're looking at the manufacturers to make materials out of goods that can, out of the resins that can be recycled, well, downcycled. So that's resins 1, 2, and 5. So because if everybody just switched over to at least those resins, then we could invest in infrastructure to recycle it here in the United States into other items. Then the other option, like actually, Colorado has done something really cool where they have created end markets. So they're making sure that the materials they need are available, and then they found the end market. So for people who need those supplies, and so then they've got the infrastructure to then supply these markets, so that they always know that there is going to be a place for their recyclables. In California last year, Senator Allen, he passed SB 343, and that says that only the items that are actually recyclable in the state of California can carry that little triangle that the chasing arrow sign that we all know is the one that is that tells us that it can go in the blue bin. So that should be very helpful, because right now in the state of California, there's only 3 things that are actually recycled throughout the state. That includes the clear and opaque plastic water bottle in any size container. It could be like 8 ounces, 16 ounces, one up to 5 gallons. That's made from resin number 1, and then if it's made from resin number 2, it can also have color but not black. But none of those products can have shrink wrap or the collars on them that keep the caps on, or then it becomes a number 7 and is not recyclable.
Are those also the products that would be listed on the label somewhere as having a California redemption value?
Yeah, yes, they would.
Okay. And for folks at home, are there things that we can be doing as consumers to help mitigate these problems now and in the future?
Yeah, well, I think people are busy, right? People are super busy. These are some of my helpful tips for trying to avoid plastic in your life. I bring either containers or wax cotton bags to the farmers markets to get blueberries, blackberries, and strawberries, and all the different fruits and vegetables that normally would be packed in plastic. I try to for like things like hummus and stuff, I try to order half sheets so that I can get it in metal foil and just freeze it, so that getting it in a larger quantity in better materials, that so you don't create a plastic waste stream. I call restaurants before I go to them, and I ask if they'll let me bring my own containers for takeout. And if they do, then I'll bring my containers by and put my order in, and pick it up when it's done, whenever, 15, 20 minutes later. I always bring containers for leftovers too. Then there's a law called AB 619, which I'm really excited. Actually, LA City tomorrow is going to be voting on the city council on having zero waste facilities. And part of that zero waste, so it'll be zero waste facilities, zero waste events. And part of that is bringing your own container. And so they will encourage everyone, whether it's, you're going to a food truck or to the park or to the office, they're going to encourage everyone to bring their own containers. And they're also going to ban single-use plastic water bottles. The only thing that will be able to be sold there will be reusable bottles.
And you mentioned that they are voting on this tomorrow, that being the 26th of April for 2022. Is that correct?
Yeah, tomorrow's the 27th. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to specify the date only because the program may re-air once or twice, and that way we avoid any confusion.
Thank you.
Additionally, are there some businesses that are cognizant of the direness of the situation and are taking steps to be more environmentally friendly? Conversely, are there businesses that we should maybe try to avoid because they're recklessly disregarding the situation?
I think honestly, the plastic crisis is the least known of all of the problems that exist in the world. And I think I'm not confident why, but even I guess even the climate crisis during the 4 years of Trump was very rarely covered in the media. And I don't even think the media is really aware of the plastic crisis. So I think there's an uphill battle that needs to somehow be, just somehow we need to get over that and bring more awareness that this is, it's meaningful, it impacts your lives. And for those busy parents that are working and picking up any of these foods, or as you mentioned earlier, like the plastic water bottles, this is having an impact on your children's health and your future children's health. And even it's kind of hard, like ice cream, everybody in the world loves ice cream, but to know that there's probably PFAS, which is the Teflon product that is coating those containers or those types of containers or even the takeout containers, and that's not really the kind of toxicity you want in your food.
Well, so far we've talked about this issue in terms of a statewide problem across the country and even worldwide. But let's bring it really local for a second. Where is Pasadena in the ban sup process?
So there's a zero waste plan that was passed in Pasadena in 2013. In 2018, my group banned SUP, banned single-use plastic, asked them to the city of Pasadena to reassess where we were on that zero waste plan. And the zero waste plan focused on getting to zero waste by 2040, including, like, it focused on the composting, the recycling, all different waste. And when they did their assessment, it turns out that we actually produce 50% more waste than we did in 2013. So the city council and the municipal services commission, they tried to have the public works department focus on, like, maybe making more recommendations, obviously changing the goals and focusing on it. But there's only a half a FTE, a full-time employee, focused on the waste issue at large in Pasadena. So there's really no bandwidth or attention being given to the zero waste problem.
Well, you just indicated that the numbers have actually increased over the initial survey, but how much of that is attributable to an increase in the local population as there are new places of dwelling being added to the city all the time? How much of that is simply the fact that there are more people in Pasadena than there were in 2013?
Oh, so the numbers were actually done per capita. So it was taken as an average per person per year. So the actual, we're close to 22 pounds per person per day as of that 2017 or 2018 calculation.
Does that number also factor in the number of visitors to the city each and every day? It is somewhat of a tourist destination. Certainly, there's a lot of shopping and a pretty thriving nightlife in the city of Pasadena. So is this just residents, or does this include even people that come in and visit?
Great question. So interestingly enough, I don't think we have a true picture because our businesses and multifamily homes are actually being they have different haulers that aren't managed by the city. So I'm not sure if that waste was taken into account at all. But I don't know.
Well, and switching gears just a little bit, but certainly still in the general idea of recycling, Pasadena just recently began urban composting. Are you involved in that?
Unfortunately. Yeah, I am very upset about, well, actually, I would love it if it were true that it was called urban composting and we were doing urban composting. Our climate action plan does state that what our first two actions are or should be include number one, people should compost at home. And number two, if you can't compost at home, Pasadena should create composting hubs for people to bring their compost to. So again, this goes back to the fact that Pasadena, the Public Works Department does not have, I think, people to really focus on the waste management issue. But their plan, let me just back up to SB 1383, which is the legislation that directed us to start managing our organic waste, was approved 5 years ago. So cities had 5 years to get a plan in place. So we know that the climate action plan directed us to compost at home or compost in local hubs. What's happened is that, and what's currently happening is that we're, for the trucks that are managed by Pasadena, we know that those going 8 miles north of here, or at least 8 miles north of my house. What's going to happen in the future is that everybody's been directed to put their food waste in a plastic bag. That plastic bag is made from petroleum. So we're just perpetuating fossil fuel fracking and the whole entire plastic crisis by doing that. You could find some people using an additional 31 bags per month or even more possibly to manage their food waste. So that bag is going to get, as thrown into a truck. It's going to get emascerated by the truck's smashing process. But if that bag does survive at the transfer station, it'll get removed. It'll get trucked out to Puente Hills, which I believe is about 22 miles east of here. That will get processed. And then once that processing is finished, that will get trucked down to Carson, additional 35 miles south of Puente Hills. Then that's going to get finished to be used for waste to energy, which is either for the facility or for cars. So instead of keeping our biodiversity and creating the microbes and bacteria that would come from that compost, in using that in our soils to help produce better food or better plants, and certainly better like insects, infrastructure, pollinators, all of those things. So instead of like renewing and rejuvenating our local soils, we're sending it to Carson to do the same thing that we were doing in Shoal Canyon, which is creating methane. And we just created a lot more methane in the process, or greenhouse gas emissions, as those trucks are driving all of that organic waste all over the place.
Well, Cheryl, for our viewers at home that might want more information or would like to become involved in what your organization is doing, how can they contact you or your organization?
Well, the easiest way by far is to, just Google my store, which is the Bansup Refill Store on El Molino, and just email or call or stop in. And we have workshops. We have composting workshops on every second Saturday of the month. We also, sometimes those are at the Rose Bowl too, with 301 Organics. And we also have other classes on like how to make things so that people aren't always dependent on shipments of things or, packaging, so that they can make things without packaging. So that's probably the best way.
Well, Cheryl, Auger, thank you so much for your time this evening. We really appreciate it, and best of luck on your continued efforts to champion the cause of recycling and overall saving the environment.
Thank you.
I'm now joined by artist Adam Schwerner. Good afternoon, and thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Great to be here, Joe. Thank you.
Adam, I'd like to start out by asking you to tell the folks at home just a little bit more about yourself, please.
Right. So I'm the son of two artists and became a horticulturalist at the age of 12. I've been in horticulture and trying to become an artist at the same time throughout my entire career. And in the last, I suppose, decade or so, I've been bringing art and horticulture together. And I think that when you bring horticulture and nature and art together into a thing, it is really quite wondrous. And so that's where I am, and that's where this show at Descanso Gardens, but like it sort of was the inspiration for the works.
Well, that is an interesting and, if I might say, just slightly unusual combination. What inspired you to put all those things together?
I don't know, Joe. I mean, people ask me, I knew from the age of 12 that I wanted to. I mean, I was a plant nerd. I've always been a plant nerd. And I knew as of the age of 12 that I wanted to do horticulture in the public realm, which is a weird thing to know to want to do. I think both my parents being artists and working they were very interested in the environment, and they did a lot of their work in the natural environment. I think somehow for me, they caused a connection between art and horticulture, or art and landscape, or art and environment that has always given me delight, and it is where I find my joy.
And I think I overheard you to say that your current exhibition is at Descanso Gardens. Is that correct?
It is. It's named Your Unnatural Garden, and it is at the Descanso Gardens in La Cañada, Flint Ridge.
So tell us a little bit about the process of getting installed into a show. How does one begin that process, and how do you go about it?
Well, 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I was at this place called the Recycling Center in Irvine, and they take the stuff that we throw out and they recycle it in one way or another. And they have wood waste from the production of cabinets and furniture and houses. And they have these towering piles, 30 feet tall and 60 feet around, of wood waste, just big piles of wood waste. And I loved the way they looked. And I always thought to myself that I'd love to do something with that stuff. Further, they have gobs and gobs of recycled wire. So wire that comes out of your house when your house is being restored, all that stuff has copper in it. So if you take the plastic off or rubber off, there's copper inside, and so there's value. So this recycling house has just endless supplies of wire. And then they have old bikes, and they have old furniture, and there is anything that anyone throws out. Eventually, it ends up at a recycling center like this place in Irvine. And so for me, the journey started with the material. Then the executive director of Descanso Gardens, Julianne Rook, asked me to consider making something for the garden. She knew that I'd done an installation in Atlanta at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. And from that conversation, I then met with her senior staff, and we talked about what I had done and what they might be interested in. Threw out some things that they were not that interested in, and then came back to the team with sort of renderings that my friend Quinn Messenger, an architect, and I created, showing the kinds of things we could do. And they were all site specific, all or most using this sort of recycled material. And at the base of it all was this idea that I really wanted people to not just witness it, standing back 6 feet like you do in a museum, but actually enter into the exhibitions, participate, sit on, move around, add to. So that was sort of how it began, my presentation at the lunch table about 3 years ago to the Descanso team.
Well, a moment ago, you mentioned that you have done, I'll say, a similar type of production at another garden. So this is clearly not your first rodeo. But how does doing an exhibition like this compare with other venues that you have exhibited at?
Well, so when I was at the Chicago Park District, we did some landscape interventions, and I also engaged with other artists to create landscape interventions. And I've never, so this is actually the first time I've created pieces for a gallery or for a historic house. So most of my work has been about being outdoors, and that being inside is a really very different experience because you have to enter into this place through a door. You have to feel like you're welcomed into it as a guest. And so I wanted to make it very inviting, and I wanted people to feel like they wanted to step into it and to interact with it. So the fact is that the way listen, artists work in different ways. The way I like to work is collaboratively, and I like to make things that are very responsive and site specific, so unique to the place.
In your response just now, I was immediately struck by a term that you used, and I cannot lie, it brought a bit of a smirk to my face just
I saw
because
that.
it sounds a little the inferences, it leaves the mind to wonder. Can you talk about a landscape intervention?
If you have a space that has plants and turf and mountains and whatever, and then some person comes in and does something in it or to it, sort of alters it, even if it's a short-term alteration. So there are artists who do temporary things. They create structures made out of ice, for instance, that melt once daylight hits, right? So those are landscape interventions. Those are alterations to a space that an individual or group of artists brings to the table that changes the experience of that place temporarily or sometimes longer term. So that's what I meant by an intervention.
Okay. I had these images of a landscape in dire need of help. And so again, I couldn't help but
Yeah.
seize on that and ask a couple of questions. So going back to your most current exhibit, you explore how the art should be consumed and or experienced. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think that one of the challenges that we have as institutions, museums, libraries, opera houses, symphony halls, galleries, is that it is not true that everyone feels invited. And so what's really interesting to me is figuring out how to create a thing that everyone feels equally invited into. And if you've got a space that feels like it's only entering those who have an education or who have certain life knowledge, you're preventing some people from getting access, right? And so what Descanso wanted out of this exhibition was to create thing for an experience that invited everybody. And that was what I wanted to accomplish too. And I think to some degree we may have accomplished that. People who visit will have to tell me if it's true or not. But what I experience when I go to Descanso and walk through the exhibition without people knowing who I am is that people of all makes and ages and types and statures and ages and from wherever they come from are enjoying and participating in the work. And that's ultimately what I wanted to have happen.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Certainly also worth noting is that there is recycled material that is used in parts of the display or exhibit. Can you talk a little bit about those materials, what they are, and how they're being used?
Right. So as I said earlier, the wood waste, so the big piles of wood waste, those many different shapes and sizes and lengths and widths of wood waste are used to create some sort of, I call them snakeways, and there are these large sculptures that line the path from the entry of Descanso up to the gallery and historic house. And I wanted one of the things that the executive director wanted was sort of signposts along the path up to the Bodhi House and the Sturt Haga Gallery to create a sort of signpost. Hey, you're going in the right way, because it's a large place and there are lots of paths, and she really wanted people to know where to go. So those large things, those structures, those sculptures are created out of this wood waste and the wire and bicycle parts and old ladders that were also retrieved from the recycling center. Then they're painted beautiful colors, vibrant colors, and they line the path. And then once you are up into the galleries, there's in the Bodhi House, I created 50 chairs out of garbage, also from the recycling center, and a table. And so there are lots of recycled materials throughout the exhibition footprint.
I'm sure that it's difficult to say that there's a favorite part of something, when the entire work is your baby, if you will.
Yeah.
But is there some part of this that speaks more to you than another?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, my mother and father got divorced, and from the age of 12 or 13 until they both passed away, they didn't want to be in the same room together. It was really hard to get them to be in the same place. Always uncomfortable. So there's an exhibition space in one of the 3 gallery spaces where I have created a room that is based on putting the 2 of them in the same room and they can't get away from each other. So in this room, there are about 1,000 bells hanging from the ceiling. And they are, throughout the day, there is a mechanization to their ringing. So they ring across the room on various level, on various tunes at various times. And those are hung with little red cords that represent my dad. He was a Buddhist, and so he wore those Buddhist bracelets around his wrist. And then my mother was an artist also, as I've said, and she painted the walls of her studio silver. So the walls in this room were painted silver. And they both were, my mother was a person who created ritual and used bells. My father was a Buddhist and he used bells. So I'm representing those 2 in the room through those things. And that's, I think, ultimately the place where I enjoy being the most.
Is this the first time that you've incorporated elements of your parents in your work, or is this a theme that has manifested itself more than once?
I mean, Joe, is there anyone listening who can avoid the influence of one's parents, no matter how old they are? I mean, I'm sure you have every day you can recognize the way your parents influenced you. So I think that this is the first exhibition where I'm being really clear and talking about it. But I think our parents always influence everything we do in one way or another. And it's not like I'm attached to my parents. They've been both dead for at least 10 years. But I think that the way we engage with our parents as young people, I mean, that echoes throughout our lifetime. So yes, for this exhibition, it is the first time, though, that I'm calling attention to it.
Well, certainly your point about your parents and their influence is well taken. I do agree. I think we can all point to things about ourselves that are clearly influenced by our upbringing. And my next question, I think you've already touched a little bit on, and that's that there is a sensory level to this this display. And obviously, clearly part of it is the bells, but are there other things, other senses that are touched on as well?
Yeah, there's one room called the uncomfy room, and it is covered with material fabric that feels like hair. There are also wigs hanging, and so there's a sensory, there's a touch. There's also something in the room called the uncomfy symphony. So there's another thing based on hearing. There's a in the Zeppelin room, there is a guests are encouraged to walk in the gravel. And so there's the sort of the feeling of walking in the gravel, and then there's the sound of walking on the gravel is very powerfully heard within the room. There's also a scent element to the exhibition. I worked collaboratively with a woman who is the executive director of the Institute for Art and Olfaction in Los Angeles, and she provided scents after consulting with me that are used in the rooms.
So again, the exhibit is called the Unnatural Garden. I have to be curious. Did the name come first, or did the display manifest itself in your mind, and then you selected a title for it?
Yeah, so it's Your Unnatural Garden, and certainly we developed the elements of the exhibition first, and then they made us want to call this Your Unnatural Garden, because in some ways it is a garden, it's within a garden, but it's also not a garden because it's my stuff, it's made. And we wanted to call it Your because we want people to sort of think of it as their stuff. We want people to experience and sort of take on responsibility for it, which they are actually doing. There's at the front entrance, the volunteers are giving a piece of red string to guests, and then the guests are tying that red string, plus other things that they find within the garden. They're tying it onto these snakeways. So they are creating the art as the art is on exhibition, and is lovely.
So it continues to develop. That
It
is
does.
very creative, and it sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
How long will the exhibit be available for viewing there at Descanso Gardens?
It opened April 16th, and it goes on until January 8th. It's a long show.
Oh, okay. So there is plenty of time for our viewers to come and take
It's plenty of time, and you know, I would hope that people will come back multiple times, because as I say, it is changing, and it's fun to see that change.
If there are viewers watching right now and in the future that would like to reach out to you, is there a way that they can contact you for more information?
I think it's best to just go to the website for Descanso Gardens to engage with them via the website. There are also docents on site. I have a full-time job, and so if people want to contact me, they could contact me through DG, the Descanso Gardens.
Lastly, I have to ask if there are any final thoughts that you have about the display, the event itself. Any final thoughts as we get ready to close out our program this evening?
Yeah. So, Joe, you know, the last 3 years, they've been tough years. I think, you know, there was political challenges around the election some time ago, and then there were difficult times based on what happened in Minneapolis, across the United States and the world. And then we had COVID, and I think people are just wanting to find a place where they can gather, have friendly conversation, not think about the past or the future, but just be where they are. And I think one of the main thrusts for me when I was creating this exhibition was to really find a way to create spaces that allowed that to happen. And you know, a botanical institution, a park, but in particular, botanical gardens. I'm a botanical garden nerd. I have always been one. And I think botanical gardens provide the kind of peacefulness and respite from what's outside the gate. And adding this layer of the work that I brought to the table, I think, and hope, and I think see happening at Descanso, this freedom of being and being present that people really are striving for, and I hope that people find it at Descanso over the next almost 9 months, and I'm very excited that Descanso was willing to give me permission to do the work that I was able to get completed there. And I also just want to thank all of the many collaborators that helped me bring this to fruition. There were many collaborators. I couldn't have done it alone, and I want to thank them. I'm not going to name them all, but thank you so much, everybody.
Adam Schwerner, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been a fascinating conversation. I certainly look forward to seeing your work. And again, thank you for taking the time to speak with us this evening.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate your time. Bye, all.
For our viewers at home, if there are topics you would like to see addressed on this program, you can email them to arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org, and we may include them in a future broadcast. Until next time, this has been Arroyo Live. I'm Joe Carbonetta. Thank you for watching, and good night.